Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Carmine's Arena, a cultural gourmet of information, if you will, a feast for your mind and soul. And now, without further delay, the man, the myth, the maestro, Carmine Arena.
Greetings and welcome once again to Carmine's Arena, site of contest and conflict, venue for and of resolution. Resolution in terms of focus, remedy, and commitment, both yours and mine, to the preservation, the propagation, and indeed the celebration of Western civilization. The great Italian epic poet named Tasso uttered a singular bit of wisdom. Ah, yes, wisdom, which is a quality of sagacity and sound judgment all of us should continue to mine from out the essence of the tried and true-proofed past. Listen to what Tasso said. Bramo assai, poco spero, nulla chiego, which easily translates to, I long for much, I hope for little, I ask for nothing. This profound insight indirectly warns us of the dangers inherent in wild desire and its steady companion, excess. And excess is what we shall seek to tame in this 89th episode of Carmine's Arena. And if we can't tame it, we can at least tether it. Great poetry, for one, has continued to gently alert us to be sad for what we have and joyous for what we lack. I'm reminded of the words of an African chieftain who was respectfully questioned by an American do-gooder. You know, the type wanting to fix things far from home. The American asked, "How do you exist? How do you manage with so little?" With a massive dignity, the chieftain quietly answered in fluent English, "We do not miss what we do not have." That profound response would appear counterintuitive, against all expectations. But this African leader and his people know more of joy than the do-gooder could ever possibly imagine, unless he lingered to tarry and to witness the lack of irritability, and instead the generosity of spirit this so-called primitive population possesses. Were we to express to our children, as well we should, the ever-diminishing returns of excess, this nettlesome need for more and yet again more, we would greatly enhance their budding lives and the culture they'd inhabit, certainly lessen their infectious irritability. On the other hand, let us just for the moment focus on how our children again and again are lavished and tarnished with unearned, undeserved praise. Think of the notion attendant on youngsters graduating from kindergarten, costumed in cap and gown. Seems cute, but with acute consequences. They soon grow into the habit of expecting praise even when they fail. Schools today give out awards and trophies to losers, all in the misguided hope that their fragile egos not be damaged. Small wonder that youth begins to dismiss and disparage adults, otherwise seeking advice from one another, whose friendly praise is rarely sickening to the same nauseating degree. If teachers today find fault with pupils, their parents excuse the brat, but make sure to routinely demean the instructor, Should an administrator deign to suspend or expel a brat cum thug, why the brat cum bully bullies his parents to return to school with an excess-loving lawyer, who in turn bullies the school board with threats of excessive damages. After a while, school boards become victims of their ostensible concern for little Johnny's ego, and objectively, to save on legal fees, turn their charges into relentless entitlement-seeking narcissists. Thus we inherit the wind of a self-infantilizing citizenry who grow to perennially demand stuff from the nanny government plantation, which now replaces depleted and disparaged moms and pops. Consequently, these excess mongers become redistribution leftist pigs and prideful prigs who sing of the merits of sharing while, mind you, becoming expert practitioners of sibling rivalries unto the reading and probate of daddy's will. They fondly talk of love for mankind, the leftists do, while praying for the lion's share of inheritance. Remember our example of the African chieftain whose tribe may be primitive, but who resemble not at all these modern, up-to-date leftist savages. Ah, yes, indeed. We have forgotten how to teach the young, how to nurture the understanding that their individual talents personally require prolonged patience and a tireless capacity for work. Teach them how to endure for just that one moment more. They'd worry less about Pop's till and will, shamelessly reduced to siblings' shrill swill, in an effort to pay their excessive bills and or yet get their fill. 'Tis ill, 'tis ill, 'tis ill. Now I leave our parent-generating brats for you to consider at your leisure. Consider how these imps grow up to cheat on tests and buy term papers, and whose teachers inflate their grades so that they, pupil and teacher, feel good, and the school goes forth to rank cool district-wide ratings. Perhaps now you begin to grasp my contempt for the cap-and-gown ritual that commenced when emerging from the intellectually taxing confines of kindergarten, with a diploma in hand, and all too soon thereafter with electronic toys in hand, where they learn not to unitask, but multitask themselves out of focus, a condition all too frequently tagged attention deficit disorder. Small wonder these brain-frozen electronic addicts are all thumbs when it comes to socializing and communicating beyond abbreviations. Today's excess also has us in widening deficits of shame, loss of guilt, and accepting of failures. And when eventually the failure of others fails the brat will get his or her well-earned reward, the reward of reality's retaliation. Now let us take a few moments to enjoy, by way of comic relief, Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi, this wide-eyed San Francisco leftist who was impaled early on by a unicorn. The ex-Madam Speaker has lost her jet plane. It was reclaimed by the United States Air Force, a cure long overdue. Perhaps it's the reason she's considering retiring. Judicial Watch, filing under the Freedom of Information Act, released documents detailing the costly use of the aircraft between March 2009 and June 2010. Here are some main highlights of excess from Pelosi recaptured from a 16-month period of excess. Several of these flights included Miss Pelosi's guests, such as grown children, grandchildren, various in-laws, friends, and your run-of-the-mill fawning hangers-on. Over 95% of the trips were between the West Coast and Washington, D.C. for what we might call a commute between home and office. Total trips, 85 over a 68-week period. Total distance travel of just under 250,000 miles. Cost to taxpayers, $2,100,744. Cost of in-flight food and alcohol, $101,429. You see what I mean by our loss of shame. On one junket to Baghdad, she had the aircraft bar stocked with, get this, Johnny Walker Scotch, Grey Goose Vodka, E&J Brandy, Bailey's Irish Cream, Maker's Mark Whiskey, Courvoisier Cognac, Bacardi Rum, Jim Beam Whiskey, Beefeater's Gin, Dewar's Scotch, Bombay Sapphire Gin, Jack Daniels, Corona Beer, and several varieties of fine wine. This was indeed a very important government business trip. To conclude this tale of gluttony and excess, which is too lengthy for the time allotted, allow me to cut to the chase so as to emphasize that in a single year, she and her spawn, and maybe a unicorn or two, consumed an amount in excess of the net income of the average employed American. When she said, and I quote, "If the stimulus doesn't pass, 500 million people might lose their jobs," one would have thought she was revealing her tenacious ignorance. 500 million people. I and others are now more inclined to think she was ungraciously pickled. So there you have it. She can now go fly a broom or ride a unicorn to work. Once there, to enact more of her pie-eyed, pie-in-the-sky, fairy tale legislation. Mark Twain. Good old Mark Twain was correct. He claimed America had no native criminal class except for Congress. Strange we talk of collectives in terms of a school of fish. A pride of lions, a murder of crows, a pack of wolves, a gaggle of geese, and get this, I'm not making this up, my friends, a congress of baboons, a most disreputable simian relative for an apt characterization depicting that self-serving partisan crew, a crew that excludes itself from the vagaries of the Obama Health Care Act, having their own very generous health coverage. This is a pointed example of it looks better on me than thee. And such is our Congress, who seem only able to agree on self-serving perks. Now, said baboons want to do something about school shootings, so they begin to tinker with gun laws, having forgotten God's law. Chicago has a batch of the strictest gun laws in the entire United States, yet the body count in the last 12 months is over 500 murdered in Chicago. Only 221 were killed in the same time period in Iraq and Afghanistan. Perhaps, Mr. President, we should pull out of Chicago. The leadership in Chicago is strictly left-leaning, Democratic-laden. Not a Republican in sight or hearing, let alone breathing. Since they can't blame the usual target, they now taken to blaming each other. Because in Chicago's combat zone, their school system is rated among the worst in the country. The state pension fund is $78 billion in debt, the worst in the nation. Chicago Cook County sales tax, get this, is 10.25%, the highest anywhere in the good old USA. This is the political culture that our revered president comes from. Former Governor George Ryan, a Democrat, what else, is now in the big house, on his way to the halfway house, beginning to finish his sentence. He was replaced by the follow-up governor, who, as I speak, that's right, is also in the big house. Representative Jesse Jackson Jr. resigned a few months back, but that is because he is fighting being sent again to the big house. This is the land of Lincoln, whose governors and lesser lights make our license plates. And I have a bulletin for gun control advocates. Israel's soldiers, male and female, while serving in the military, are expected to carry their sidearm home to kith and kin. Despite this, there has been none of the degenerate misuse of weapons all too common elsewhere, for example, in Australia, where personal possession of firearms has been outlawed, is presently witnessing and experiencing a shocking increase in violent crime, home invasions, and an increase in criminal activity overall, much to the surprise and consternation of its liberal politicians and gun control advocates. I can't imagine why these do-gooders neglect the fatal crimes in prisons, where resourceful inmates fashion lethal weapons out of toothbrushes, pencils, and razor blades, and all out of a will to power sans guns and sans bullets. 'Tis well to remember that liberals need a target and or crisis to push their particular mush. My recommendation is when and wherever they hold power, either here or abroad, the opposition do what liberals can't abide. In fact, liberals deeply fear, and that is to agree with their every nitpicking proposal. When there is no remaining opposition, they will be minus a target to heap scorn and blame upon. Then the left can blame only the left and cling to what's left the frayed remnants of their ragtag brags. The newest gush, doubling back to the tired mush, at least for a while will enjoy a comforting hush, allowing the right to set aright what is left of our leftover plights. That is until next time, since the left shall always remain our enabled family darling, that sweet brat from whom we make and for whom we make excuses. But if you don't believe this from little old me, the teller, then perhaps you should believe the tale. For the left, barefaced or masked, my allergy, the left, barefaced or masked, as I was saying, craves for the tyranny of socialism. Socialism, which is a fraud. Socialism, which is a comedy, a phantom, and holds truth a hostage to blackmail. Cuba, who's taken postgraduate posturing in social tinkering, has a workforce of 80% working strictly for the government. They are fond of saying that the government, pretend to pay them and that they pretend to work. Yes, socialism is a perfect philosophy for the mañana syndrome. And no, it just doesn't work. No, it merely idles until it stalls and conks out like some old jalopy, loved but abandoned. Self-reliance and capitalism instead play host to science, democracy, medicine, consumerism, and is dedicated to the work ethic, while it generously generates philanthropy, charity, and an abhorrence of the government plantation, sponsored by the nanny state policy for born losers and venal politicians. Speaking of which, we've something to learn from the last election. 21 of 22 incumbent senators were re-elected. And 353 of 373 incumbent members of the House were reelected. 94% of the incumbents who were running for reelection to an institution that has an approval rating of about 9%. This indicates, as an electorate, that we are a nation whose pampering schools have produced an assorted product of morons, imbeciles, and idiots, certainly not intellectuals. For we are now stuck in a Potomac swamp of a useless, dysfunctional government that we roundly deserve, given our excessive penchant and passion to celebrate failure. 'Tis well to consider that if your family physician had the same standards as those in Congress, your life would be worth the same as an aborted infant, an infant who never made it to kindergarten graduation. Why, the little soul didn't even merit a mother who's been assured by gender benders that she is empowered and has control of her body until it's surrendered once again to that mere male. You know, that no-account dude feminists imagine they've tamed. The CDC Center for Disease Control reports that each day 4,000 innocent children are aborted in the United States alone. I don't know about you, but I consider this statistic a clarion message of excess. Were women truly empowered as they once were, there would be less conceiving and more perceiving. For if there's a war on women, abortion advocates are the friendly enemy whose collateral damage is incomparably greater than their failed protections could ever manage nor promise. Another example of governments and their propensity for excess is to take a cursory look at the city of Detroit. Even though Detroit is a one-party Democratic town, its namby-pamby nanny state policies have led, after decades of unopposed excess, to a bankrupt, empty city that leads the nation in poverty. Food stamps, high crime rates, abandoned buildings, and broken street lamps. Such is leftist darkness, these wretches who claim to see the light. You see, my friends, the definition of excess is when too much is yet never enough. In good old New York City, school busing costs about $7,000 a year per child, an amount so outrageously high that many of these children could hire a livery cab for about the same price. Busing costs $1.1 billion a year in New York City today. In 1979, the cost was $100 million. What an increase. Once we had neighborhood schools to which we walked on foot, and the quality of our educational system was the envy of the world. We did this without leftist greedy unions grown so large and politically connected. Teachers can't be fired for incompetence. When the problem becomes embarrassingly gross, they are sent to rubber rooms, a euphemism for a padded cell, where these cap and gowned failures engage in busy work, but continue receiving the same pay as their more competent and active co-unionists. Yet, we're repeatedly told that not enough is spent on education. Perhaps unions ought to contribute their ill-gotten dues and lower the excessive salaries of union leaders. Education can use their collective charity. But charity is meant for the godly, not the godly lordly. Failure must be protected no matter the cost, mustn't it? How am I doing so far in this sad discourse upon the native drive which courts excess? As I've remarked to my audience before, I may not be a fountain of wisdom, but I do consider myself a serious leak. So let me try to throw some remaining cold water on partisan political debate so as to cool the raging wrath mistaken for righteous fervor, that frantic excess in and of argumentation which walls off dialogue, that kind of dialogue which starts and stops with schoolyard-type taunts of one-upmanship. Whereas fruitful argumentation should submit to cooperative controversy, as once it did when we had the conventions of truth and truth-seeking as opposed to argumentation deaf to reasoning, said reasoning tested by doubt. For as I proved in my last appearance on this program, people who have arrived at certainty are people who are in serious decline. Our divided partisan culture has lost the spirit of cooperative controversy. It merely seeks to prevail in the absurd absence of proof and in that bold presence of self-contradiction. If it feels right, it's got to be right. Reminds one of street drugs and their promise. Soon we'll be calling drug pushers pharmacologists, or at the very least, social workers. I have here started off at the beginning of this program with an epic poet by the name of Tasso and given you his wisdom. Allow me now to give you another epic poet with epic wisdom, the most epic president we've ever had, Abraham Lincoln. Listen to these lines. They're worthy of tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow thereafter. You cannot help the poor by destroying the rich. You cannot strengthen the weak by weakening the strong. You cannot bring about prosperity by discouraging thrift. You cannot lift the wage earner up by pulling the wage payer down. You cannot further the brotherhood of man by inciting class hatred. You cannot build character and courage by taking away people's initiative and independence. You cannot help people permanently by doing for them what they could do and should do for themselves. Well, I'm being signaled I'm out of time and I dare not be excessive. Meanwhile, I intend to write an anthem keyed to excess, duly entitled, "Oh Say Can You See, Nancy Pelosi." Till next we meet, my friends, do keep the faith.
If you have any comments or other remarks, and that I perhaps could even read on some of these broadcasts, please do not hesitate to write to me, Carmine Arena, P.O. Box 1029, Larchmont, New York, 10538.